Have you ever heard that Galileo died in jail? It's a powerful story, but is it actually true? Today, we're diving deep into the life of a man who looked at the stars and changed our world forever. Galileo Galilei. He didn't just invent the telescope, he perfected it, turning it from a simple spyglass into a window to the cosmos. And what he saw through that lens would ignite one of the greatest conflicts between science and authority in history. Imagine living in a world where everyone, absolutely everyone, believed the Earth was the center of everything. The sun, the moon, the planets, the stars, they all revolved around us. This wasn't just a popular idea. It was the official doctrine, backed by the immense power of the Catholic Church. This geocentric model, based on the teachings of Aristotle and Ptolemy, had been the undisputed truth for over 1,000 years. It was woven into the very fabric of society, philosophy, and faith. The heavens were perfect, unchanging, and divinely ordained to circle our special home, Earth. This was the world Galileo was born into, a world with a fixed and comfortable understanding of its place in the universe. But Galileo was a man of insatiable curiosity, and he was about to point his telescope at the sky and shatter that comfort to pieces. So, what did Galileo actually see? When he looked at the moon, he didn't see a perfect, smooth orb, as everyone believed. He saw mountains, valleys, and craters, just like the ones on Earth. This was a shocking revelation. The heavens weren't some perfect, ethereal realm. They were made of the same stuff as our own world. Then, he turned his telescope to Jupiter. He noticed 4 tiny points of light dancing around the giant planet. Night after night, he tracked them, realizing they were moons orbiting Jupiter. This was a bombshell. If moons could orbit Jupiter, then not everything in the universe revolved around the Earth. It was the first clear, observational crack in the geocentric model. He also observed the phases of Venus, which cycled just like our moons. This could only be explained if Venus was orbiting the Sun, not the Earth. And when he looked at the Sun itself, using a projection method to protect his eyes, he saw sunspots, imperfections moving across its surface. The Sun, the very symbol of celestial perfection, was blemished. Each of these discoveries was a nail in the coffin of the old world view. Galileo was gathering overwhelming evidence for a different theory, one proposed by a Polish astronomer named Nicolaus Copernicus nearly a century earlier. Heliocentrism, the idea that the Earth and other planets actually revolve around the Sun. Galileo wasn't just guessing. He had proof, evidence you could see with your own eyes through his telescope. He published his findings in a book called The Starry Messenger, which became an instant sensation across Europe. People were amazed, excited, and for some, deeply disturbed. Galileo was celebrated as a genius, but his work was also setting him on a collision course with the most powerful institution of his time. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. Initially, the church was cautiously interested in Galileo's work. Many high-ranking church officials, including astronomers and mathematicians, were intrigued by his discoveries. However, the core issue was that heliocentrism directly contradicted certain literal interpretations of Scripture. Passages in the Bible seemed to describe a stationary Earth and a moving sun. To challenge this was to challenge the authority of the Church itself. In 1616, the Inquisition, the Church's judicial body, formally declared heliocentrism a heresy. Galileo was warned not to hold, teach, or defend the Copernican theory in any way. For a while, Galileo complied. He continued his work but was careful not to openly advocate for a sun-centered universe. He was walking a tightrope, trying to balance his scientific integrity with his safety. But the scientist in him couldn't stay silent forever. He felt he had a duty to share the truth he had uncovered. Years later, a new pope was elected, Pope Urban VIII, who happened to be a friend and admirer of Galileo. Galileo saw this as an opportunity. He thought he could finally present his arguments. He received permission to write a book discussing both the geocentric and heliocentric models, on the condition that he treat the Copernican view as a hypothesis and give the Church's view the final, conclusive word. The result was his masterpiece, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. The book is written as a conversation between 3 men. One argues for Galileo's views, another is a neutral layman, and the third, named Simplicio or Simpleton, defends the traditional geocentric model. The problem was, Galileo made Simplicio sound like a complete fool, and to make matters worse, he put the Pope's own arguments into Simplicio's mouth. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. The Pope felt mocked and betrayed. The friendship was over, and the full weight of the Inquisition came crashing down on Galileo. This led to the infamous trial of 1633. Galileo, now nearly 70 years old and in poor health, was summoned to Rome to face the Inquisition. The trial was less about scientific debate and more about an assertion of authority. The charge was heresy. Faced with the threat of torture and a painful death, Galileo had no choice. In a public ceremony, he was forced to abjure, curse, and detest his own work. He had to formally renounce the idea that the earth moves around the sun. Legend has it that as he rose from his knees, he muttered, "And yet, it moves." But there's no real evidence this ever happened. It's a great story, but likely just a story. The verdict was guilty. Galileo was sentenced to prison for the rest of his life. So, did Galileo die in jail? Not exactly. While he was sentenced to formal imprisonment, his sentence was almost immediately commuted to house arrest. It wasn't a dark, damp dungeon. He spent the last years of his life, from 1634 until his death in 1642, confined to his villa outside of Florence. He was allowed to continue his scientific work, though his astronomy books remained banned. In fact, during this period of confinement, he wrote one of his most important books, To New Sciences, which laid the groundwork for modern physics. It was smuggled out of Italy and published in Holland. Even under house arrest, blind and aging, his brilliant mind never stopped working. He was a prisoner, yes, but a prisoner who was still pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Galileo's story is a powerful reminder of the struggle for intellectual freedom. His work was so monumental that future giants of science stood on his shoulders. Albert Einstein called him the father of modern science for his insistence on observation and experimentation. Stephen Hawking noted that Galileo was perhaps more responsible for the birth of modern science than any other single person. It took the Church a very, very long time to come around. It wasn't until 1992, over 350 years later, that Pope John Paul II officially expressed regret for how the Galileo affair was handled, admitting that theologians of the time had made a mistake. Today, Galileo's legacy is secure. Every time we look up at the night sky through a telescope, every time a probe lands on Mars, we're following the path he forged. He taught us to question, to observe, and to trust evidence above all else. His life wasn't just about a conflict with the Church, it was about the triumph of the curious human spirit. He faced down immense power not with weapons, but with a telescope and an unwavering commitment to the truth. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the life of Galileo. If you enjoyed this exploration of science and history, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next adventure. Let me know in the comments what you find most fascinating about Galileo's story. Until next time, keep looking up.